The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday, unremarkable among the pile of mail on Camille Shore's desk. No return address, just her name written in careful, flowing script. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery containing 7 words that made her blood run cold. "Thank you for remembering me. I remember you." Camille stared at the letter, her fingers suddenly numb. 3 weeks ago, she had published her first feature article for the Bayview Chronicle, retrospective on the 20th anniversary of the city's most notorious unsolved murders. Now, it seemed, someone had noticed. She glanced around the crowded newsroom, suddenly feeling exposed. At 26, Camille was the youngest journalist on staff, and as an intern, she occupied the most visible desk, right in the middle of the floor with no privacy. Her editor, Leonard Hayes, had only assigned her the Smiling Man piece because everyone else was occupied with real news. A cold case retrospective seemed safe enough for the new girl. But there was nothing safe about this letter. The Smiling Man killings had terrorized Bayview throughout the summer of 2003. 5 victims in total, each found with their facial muscles manipulated post-mortem into grotesque smiles. The case had gone cold when the killings abruptly stopped in September of that year. No suspects, no arrests, just a city left to wonder if their bogeyman would someday return. Camille slipped the letter into her bag and grabbed her jacket. She needed to think, and the stuffy newsroom with its fluorescent lighting and constant chatter was not the place. "You know this is probably just some weirdo, right?" Detective Mira Rios studied the letter, now carefully sealed in a plastic evidence bag. Despite being in her 50s, Rios had sharp eyes that missed nothing. Every time there's a story about an old case, the crazies come out. They sat in Rios's cramped office at the Bayview Police Department. The detective had been a rookie officer during the original investigation, and Camille had interviewed her extensively for the article. But what if it's not? Camille leaned forward. What if it's really him? Rios sighed, placing the letter on her cluttered desk. "Then he's breaking a 20-year silence because of your article, which seems unlikely. The details of how the smiles were created were never released to the public," Camille countered. "In my article, I mentioned that the killer used a specific technique, inserting pins at precise points to manipulate the facial muscles. Only the killer would know that. Or anyone who worked the case," Rios reminded her. "Or anyone those people might have told over the years. Information leaks, especially over 2 decades. But Camille could tell the detective was troubled. The Smiling Man case had haunted the Bayview PD for years. 5 victims over 3 months. A college student, a middle-aged lawyer, an elderly shopkeeper, a teenage waitress, and a homeless man. No connection between them, no pattern beyond the signature smiles, and the fact that each was taken on a night with a new moon. "I'll have the lab check for prints," Rios finally said. "But don't get your hopes up." And Camille, the detective fixed her with a stern look. "Be careful what you wish for. You may have stirred up something better left buried." The message from Detective Rios came 3 days later. No fingerprints on the letter. No DNA on the envelope. No way to trace its origin. But Camille had already moved forward with her own investigation. She'd created a timeline of the original murders on the wall of her tiny apartment, connecting victims with red string, annotating police reports she'd obtained through her press credentials. The deeper she dug, the more she felt that something had been missed in the original investigation. All 5 victims had been taken from different parts of Bayview, but when she plotted their disappearances on a map, she noticed they formed a rough circle around the old Bayview Psychiatric Hospital, which had been abandoned since the 1990s and demolished in 2007. Camille found herself driving past the empty lot where the hospital once stood. Now it was just an overgrown field surrounded by a chain-link fence, with new development planned but never started. Something about the place made her skin crawl, even in broad daylight. She parked her car and walked the perimeter of the fence. According to old news reports, the hospital had been closed after allegations of patient abuse and unethical experimental treatments. But most records had been sealed by court order, making it difficult to research further. As she completed her circuit of the fence, Camille noticed an older man watching her from across the street. He sat on a bench, feeding pigeons, his eyes never leaving her. When their gazes met, he smiled, not threateningly, but with a strange familiarity that made her uncomfortable. Camille returned to her car quickly, but when she looked back, the man was gone, the pigeons scattered. That night, she received a second letter. "Looking in the wrong places, little journalist. The hospital holds no answers for you. But I appreciate your effort. This is getting serious, Camille. Leonard Hayes frowned at her over his desk. Her editor was a bear of a man with a perpetually concerned expression. First you published this retrospective. Now you're talking about reopening the investigation. The police worked this case for years and found nothing. Camille insisted. Someone is responding to my article, Leonard. Someone who knows details about the murders. Or someone who read your very detailed article, he countered. You practically provided a how-to guide for copycat killers. The criticism stung, but Camille pushed back. I didn't publish anything that wasn't already in police reports. And these letters, they feel authentic. Hayes sighed heavily. Look, I understand the appeal. Young journalist cracks cold case, Pulitzer follows. But be careful you're not creating a story where there isn't one. Just give me 2 weeks, she pleaded. If I find nothing concrete, I'll drop it. After a long moment, Hayes nodded reluctantly. 2 weeks. But you still handle your regular assignments, and you run everything by me before you publish a word. The third letter arrived at her apartment. Not the newsroom, her home. Inside was a Polaroid photograph of her standing at the fence around the old hospital site. On the back, written in the same flowing script, we should meet, I have stories to tell. Camilla's hands shook as she called Detective Rios. This crosses a line, Rios said grimly when she arrived to collect the evidence. He's watching you now. Stalking, or she? Camille said absently, staring at the photograph now sealed in an evidence bag. We've always assumed the smiling man was male, but that's just an assumption. Rios raised an eyebrow. Fair point. But regardless of who it is, they know where you live. That's concerning. What if this person isn't threatening me? Camille suggested. What if they really do want to tell their story? You cannot be serious. Rios looked incredulous. You're not considering meeting a potential serial killer. But what if they have information that could close the case? Camille pressed. What if they're not the killer but someone who knows what happened? Then they can come to the police station like a normal citizen, Rios countered. Listen to me carefully, do not engage with this person. We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood, but consider staying somewhere else for a while. After the detective left, Camille stared at her investigation wall. The victims' faces stared back at her. 5 people whose families had never received closure. If the letter writer was indeed the smiling man, this was the closest the case had come to resolution in 20 years. She thought of Harris Jenkins, the elderly shopkeeper, whose granddaughter Camille had interviewed for her article. The woman had broken down crying, still raw with grief after 2 decades. I just want to know why, she had sobbed. Why my grandfather? Why the smile? Camille made her decision. If the letter writer contacted her again, she would respond. The 4th communication came 3 days later. A burner phone left in a paper bag hanging from her apartment doorknob. It rang less than an hour after she found it. Hello, Camille. The voice was disguised, digitally altered to a flat, sexless monotone. I've been following your investigation with interest. But Camille's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. Who are you? Someone who appreciates thorough journalism. A pause. Your article was impressive. Most reporters get the details wrong. What details did I get right? She probed, trying to discern if this was truly someone connected to the killings. The smiles, of course. 32 gauge pins, inserted precisely at the zygomaticus major and minor muscles. A technique requiring anatomical knowledge. Camille swallowed hard. This detail hadn't been in her article, or any public report. What do you want from me? She asked. To set the record straight, the voice replied. The smiling man case is misunderstood. The narrative is incomplete. Then complete it for me, Camille said. Meet me somewhere public. Not yet. First, you need to understand what you're dealing with. The voice paused. The Bayview Psychiatric Hospital. You are onto something there, but looking in the wrong direction. Check the patient records from 1998 to 2001. Focus on the experimental treatments in Ward C. The line went dead before she could respond. This is insanity, Detective Rios hissed across the table at Camille. They sat in a corner booth at a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the police station. You should have come to me immediately. I'm coming to you now, Camille pointed out, with a solid lead. A lead from someone who may be a serial killer, Rios countered. Who hasn't killed anyone in 20 years, Camille argued. And who seems more interested in telling their story than threatening me. Rios rubbed her temples. Even if we wanted to check these hospital records, most were destroyed when the facility closed. Others are sealed by court order. But they exist somewhere, Camille insisted. court sealed means they're in storage. After a long moment, Rios sighed heavily. I might be able to get a warrant, given the connection to an open murder investigation. But it'll take time. And you, she pointed a finger at Camille, will stop communicating with this person. Camille nodded, not quite meeting the detective's eyes. It took Rios 4 days to access the sealed records. 4 days in which Camille received no further communications from the mysterious caller. 4 days of jumping at shadows and checking over her shoulder. When Rios finally called, her voice was tight with tension. You need to see this. No. The records revealed that Ward C had housed an experimental program treating patients with extreme antisocial disorders. The chief physician, Dr. Leas Mercer, had implemented controversial treatments involving nerve stimulation and experimental drugs. 3 patients died under his care, their deaths quietly covered up by hospital administrators. The program was shut down in 2001 after a patient filed a lawsuit and Dr. Mercer resigned. The thing is, Rios said, spreading photographs across her desk, Mercer disappeared right before the first smiling man killing, and no one has seen him since. As she handed Camille a staff photo, Dr. Elias Mercer was a thin man with hollow cheeks and intense eyes. Something about his face tickled Camille's memory. One of his experimental treatments, Rios continued, involved stimulating facial muscles to induce emotional states. He believed that physically creating expressions could alter brain chemistry, forcing smiles to make patients happy. Camille murmured, exactly. And when the hospital shut down his program, he lost everything. His research, his reputation, his sanity. Camille finished. She stared at Mercer's photograph, suddenly recognizing him. This is the man I saw at the hospital site. Older now, but the same person. Raz's phone rang. After a brief conversation, her face paled. They found another body. Same MO, the smiling man is back. The victim was a security guard at a storage facility across town, found with pins precisely placed in his facial muscles, forcing his mouth into that signature rictus grin. The first new victim in 20 years. As Camille stood at the edge of the crime scene watching forensic technicians work, her burner phone rang. Did you find what you were looking for in those records? The altered voice asked. Dr. Mercer? She replied, watching Rios direct officers nearby. Is that who you are? A long pause. Mercer understood that emotions begin with physical expression. The body leads, the mind follows. His only mistake was believing he could use this to heal. And you use it to kill, Camille said, keeping her voice low. I create moment of perfect happiness. Each subject experiences transcendent joy in their final moments, their bodies locked in that expression even after death. That's insane, Camille whispered. Is it? Or is it the ultimate gift? To die experiencing perfect happiness. Why contact me? She demanded. Why now, after 20 years? Because you asked the right questions in your article. Because I'm ready for the world to understand my work. And because time is running short for me. Cancer, the voice explained dispassionately. Terminal. My work will end soon one way or another. Turn yourself in, Camille urged. Explain your work to the police. They wouldn't understand. But you might meet me where it all began. Tonight at midnight. Come alone or I disappear forever, taking my truth with me. The line went dead. Camille looked up to see Rios watching her intently from across the crime scene. She told Rios everything, of course. Despite her hunger for the story, Camille wasn't foolish enough to meet a serial killer alone. Together they determined that where it all began must mean the old hospital site. That night, a police tactical team surrounded the abandoned lot where Bayview Psychiatric Hospital once stood. Camille wore a wire with strict instructions to stay behind the police line, but as midnight approached and no one appeared, she grew restless. Then her burner phone chimed with a text message. Not the hospital, where I first saw you. 20 years ago. Camille frowned. 20 years ago, she had been just 6 years old, living in a small house on Maple Street with her mother, a childhood home she hadn't thought about in years. Suddenly, a distant memory surfaced. A thin man with hollow cheeks who once lived across the street. A quiet neighbor who sometimes sat on his porch watching the neighborhood children play. A man who had once helped her up when she fell from her bicycle, who had smiled at her with sad eyes. With cold clarity, Camille realized where the smiling man would be waiting. She slipped away from the police perimeter, ignoring Rios' shouts behind her. Some truths needed to be faced alone. The old house on Maple Street looked smaller than she remembered. The porch light was off, but a figure sat in the darkness, waiting. Hello, Camille, said Dr. Elias Mercer, his voice now unaltered and achingly familiar. You've grown into a remarkable young woman, but as she approached, she could see how illness had ravaged him. His hollow cheeks were now skeletal, his eyes sunken but still intense. "Why did you stop?" she asked, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. 20 years ago. Why did you disappear?" Mercer's smile was sad. "Because of you. A little girl who fell off her bicycle right in front of my house, who looked up at me with such innocent trust as I helped her up." He cuffed a wet, rattling sound. "I realized I couldn't bear to see that trust betrayed when they eventually caught me. So I stopped. I disappeared. Until my article brought you back. Your article made me realize it was time for someone to understand. The truth deserved a witness." In the distance, police sirens wailed. "They're coming for you," Camille said quietly. Mercer nodded, unsurprised. "Of course they are. You're a good journalist, Camille, thorough, ethical." He stood with visible effort. "Before they arrive, I have a gift for you. The complete Trunals. My everything documented, every subject, every moment of joy I created." He held out a weathered leather notebook. "The story you've been looking for." But as Camille climbed the steps to take the offered notebook, she studied the face of the monster who had spared her neighborhood 20 years ago. The face of a man who had killed 6 people but had stopped himself from killing more. A monster with just enough humanity to recognize innocence when he saw it. "One question," she said as the sirens grew closer. "Were they really happy?" At the end, Mercer's eyes filled with tears. That was always the tragedy, Camille. The smile was just a physical manipulation. There was never any joy, only fear frozen in a parody of happiness. As police cars screeched to a halt outside the house, Mercer looked at her with resignation. Some monsters know exactly what they are. The true horror isn't in not knowing, it's in knowing and continuing anyway. The police tactical team swarmed the porch, Detective Rios in the lead, weapon drawn. As they handcuffed Mercer, Camille clutched the journal. The final chapter of a story that had begun decades ago, when a little girl fell off her bicycle and was helped up by a man who, for just one moment, chose not to be a monster. The story that would finally bring closure to 5 grieving families and prevent there ever being a 6th. In the harsh glare of police flashlights, Mercer's face held no smile at all. Only the peaceful expression of a man whose long nightmare had finally ended.
It takes a lot of time to create these videos. I would really appreciate your support. All I ask for is a quick like on the video and subscribe. Thank you so much.